The belief that a man must be harmless to be good is the most dangerous lie we ever told ourselves, because it guarantees the proliferation of the resentful, the dishonest, and the psychologically weak. We have conflated decency with impotence, mistaking the absence of conflict for the presence of character, and we are now drowning in the consequences of this pathological deference. The nice guy, the man who prioritizes external approval above internal integrity, is not merely benign. He is a silent saboteur of relationships, a master manipulator by way of martyrdom, and a walking contradiction whose very commitment to niceness ensures his eventual eruption. His danger is rooted precisely in his absolute refusal to own his own strength, his anger, or his necessary aggression. He believes that by suppressing the shadow, he eliminates it, when in reality he merely poisons the well of his own soul, and ensures that his darkness, when it finally surfaces, will be uncontrollable, undirected, and deeply cruel. The true paradox is this: the man who is genuinely good has the capacity for great harm, but he chooses not to exercise it. The nice guy, however, is merely incapable of harm, and his pretended virtue is nothing more than paralyzing fear dressed up as morality. When a man lacks the internal framework to assert himself, to draw a hard line, or to embrace the healthy friction necessary for growth, he does not become morally superior. He becomes emotionally dishonest. His smiles become masks, his favors become debts, and his passive compliance begins accumulating interest in an internal emotional ledger that he expects the world to pay back. Every time he says yes when he means no, every time he swallows an honest objection, he isn't being generous. He is initiating a secret transaction. He is loaning patience and expecting attention, validation, sex, or safety in return. When the world inevitably fails to cash his invisible checks, the resentment begins its slow tectonic shift, manifesting as passive aggression, covert sabotage, or a sudden shocking outburst that seems utterly disconnected from the minor grievance that triggered it. This explosion is not random. It is the inevitable cost of emotional debt default. This is why true harmlessness is the prerequisite for volatility. A man who cannot consciously engage with his own competitive, aggressive, or demanding nature is a man governed by those same forces unconsciously. They do not vanish. They burrow deep, festering in the dark corners of his personality until they emerge as cynicism, vindictiveness, and a paralyzing fear of genuinely accountable action. He cannot take responsibility for his own wants, so he tries to subtly control the environment around him to deliver them without him ever having to ask directly. He employs weaponized incompetence, silent treatment, and the strategic deployment of his own perpetual victimhood to force others into anticipating and fulfilling his needs. If this analysis feels uncomfortably accurate, if you are tired of comfortable lies and ready to confront the real, difficult truths about the psychological architecture that governs our lives, then take a moment now and subscribe. Don't let the algorithms bury the conversations that actually illuminate the human condition. The nice guy is obsessed with optics, prioritizing the appearance of virtue over the substance of integrity. Integrity demands that you know your limits, that you are honest about your desires, and that you are willing to tolerate the discomfort of conflict for the sake of a greater truth. The nice guy cannot tolerate that discomfort. Conflict for him is not an opportunity for clarification or boundary setting. It is an existential threat to his approval rating. He would rather live in a relationship built on fragile, unacknowledged lies than risk the momentary disappointment of speaking an uncomfortable truth. He is a coward masquerading as a saint, and his greatest tragedy is that, in his desperate pursuit of universal acceptance, he becomes universally untrustworthy. Nobody, deep down, trusts a person who has no boundaries, because they instinctively understand that a person who takes everything will eventually give nothing, and a man who refuses to defend his own self will eventually resent everyone who forces him to concede. The nice guy is always conceding, always retreating, always deferring, until the only thing left of him is a hollow shell filled with the sediment of bitterness. He poses a threat not through malice, but through a terrifying lack of psychological musculature. A fundamental inability to stand up and say, "This is who I am, this is what I need, and this is where I draw the line." And a man without a line is a man without a self, making him dangerous not just to others, but devastatingly so to himself. He is the quiet storm, building pressure beneath the surface, guaranteeing that the eventual reckoning will be far more destructive than any upfront, honest confrontation ever could have been. The nice guy did not choose niceness. It was chosen for him. An adaptation, a twisted survival strategy forged in the crucible of conditional love. This behavior is rooted in a core, primal wound. The existential fear that his authentic, raw, messy self is fundamentally unacceptable. He was taught, implicitly or explicitly, that his value was not inherent, but had to be earned by eliminating all inconvenient, aggressive, or demanding parts of his personality. His life became a perpetual audition for acceptance, operating under the heavy, tyrannical pressure of the internalized, parental, or societal gaze. He learned to create what Carl Jung might call a meticulously manicured persona, a false self so polished and innocuous that it could pass through any social barrier without setting off alarms. But this persona is merely a highly complex piece of protective armor, and the tragedy is that the armor eventually fuses with the skin, leaving the true self starved, suffocating, and convinced that it deserves to be entombed. He doesn't genuinely suppress his needs. He weaponizes them, transforming his kindness into a form of psychological currency. This is the hidden ledger of the nice guy. He does not commit acts of unconditional generosity. He commits acts of subtle anticipatory debt collection. Every favor performed, every uncomfortable boundary ignored, every emotional burden shouldered is meticulously tallied on an invisible spreadsheet of virtue. He expects an appropriate return on his investment, which is usually not material but abstract, unqualified, permanent approval, gratitude without end, and the absolute freedom from ever having his own repressed needs questioned. When the recipient of his kindness fails to deliver this impossible yield, the nice guy does not confront them. He descends into the poison of resentment. He sees himself as a martyr unjustly denied the crown he was promised, concluding that the world is inherently unfair, rather than admitting that his entire architecture of niceness was a cynical and manipulative contract to begin with. He is bitter because the world refuses to grant him the power he believes his performance of powerlessness has earned him. Analyzing this level of psychological complexity, the way shame and fear warp the purest human drives into insidious forms of control, demands time and attention. If you find value in cutting through the surface noise and the comforting cultural lies to understand the hidden, difficult machinery of human behavior, please ensure you subscribe right now. This is a battle against the algorithms that prefer simplicity. Your subscription helps guarantee that deep, challenging content finds its audience. The nice guy's greatest failure is his refusal to integrate his own shadow. The shadow is not just the repository of dark thoughts. It is the source of necessary aggression, self-advocacy, and vital energy. By relentlessly suppressing conflict, he starves the very parts of his spirit required for healthy engagement. His suppressed aggression doesn't vanish. It merely shifts from active expression into passive warfare. He becomes the master of weaponized incompetence, the silent manipulator whose primary tool is the infliction of guilt. He uses martyrdom as leverage, forcing others to feel responsible for the misery he himself engineered by refusing to set boundaries. His eventual outbursts are never about the present disagreement. They are the violent, delayed eruption of years of self-betrayal. He isn't suddenly angry, he is simply allowing the dam of repressed self-loathing, meticulously built out of concession after concession, to finally break. And when it breaks, it doesn't just damage the intended target, it floods and destroys the entire emotional landscape of the relationship, proving, tragically, that the avoidance of small, honest conflicts only guarantees a massive, dishonest reckoning. The nice guy is therefore not an exception to the rule of human malice. He is simply the psychological equivalent of a time bomb, ticking down in slow motion, waiting for the precisely wrong moment to prove that the most dangerous form of hatred is the kind that a man reserves for himself. The nice guy's pathology is rooted in the tragic misidentification of courage. He believes that true strength is the capacity to endure suffering silently, and absorb the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune without complaint. A stoicism warped into self-pitying martyrdom. What he fails to grasp is that true strength is the ability to inflict necessary pain, to draw a clear line, and to withstand the temporary psychological discomfort of being disliked because the long-term integrity of a relationship or a project demands it. The moment he confuses moral purity with effective action, he forfeits his power. The world does not reward the man who means well. It rewards the man who acts decisively. Thus, the nice guy, terrified of the necessary friction required to forge anything worthwhile, settles for the soft, sterile safety of the spectator. He becomes the eternal assistant, the indispensable supporter, the man who is almost promoted because his psychological wiring forbids him from taking the helm and risking the inevitable criticism that comes with leadership. His refusal to engage in conflict is often touted as humility, but it is nothing less than the narcissistic preservation of an idealized, fragile self-image. He would rather watch a system burn down than risk being the arsonist who struck the match of difficult truth. His niceness is fundamentally the abdication of responsibility. To see this cold mechanism in action, observe the nice guy in a position of managerial authority. A common and highly damaging scenario. He has an employee, let's call him David, who is chronically incompetent, consistently misses deadlines, and actively poisons team morale through complaining and underperformance. The manager knows this. The business metrics scream that David must be terminated. But the nice guy manager cannot bring himself to do it. He tells himself and others that he is being compassionate, that he is giving David another chance, because he feels sorry for David's personal struggles. The truth, however, is far more brutal. He fears the 30 minutes of emotional labor required to deliver the bad news and endure David's tears or anger. He fears the paperwork, yes, but mostly he fears being the cause of another man's pain. So, what happens? He protects his own short-term comfort, his status as the good guy, at the expense of the entire team. The competent employees, those who reliably deliver, are forced to pick up David's slack. Their workload increases, their morale plummets, and their trust in the manager dissolves. The manager's passive avoidance is revealed to be a supreme form of cruelty directed not at the underperformer, but at the dedicated high performers whose loyalty he takes for granted. His compassion for one man becomes a calculated betrayal of 5. This is the definitive signature of the nice guy. His superficial kindness is a zero-sum game that always prioritizes his internal, unassailable moral narrative over external tangible results, or the genuine welfare of others. He is the guardian of comfort, not the steward of growth. The nice guy operates under the delusion that he can control reality by controlling his own presentation. He believes that if he is pleasing enough, generous enough, compliant enough, the universe will reward him by ensuring he never has to face difficulty or disapproval. When reality inevitably fails to deliver this magical guarantee, his buried rage begins to simmer. He views every setback, every honest disagreement, and every moment of necessary self-assertion as a gross violation of the implicit contract he believes he holds with the world. He feels entitled not to success but to comfort, and when that comfort is revoked, he resorts to what he knows best: emotional blackmail. If you are struggling to reconcile the difference between genuine psychological depth and the shallow, comfort-driven narratives that dominate modern discourse, please consider subscribing. This channel is committed to dissecting the darker, more complex truths of human nature, and your support is essential for continuing this demanding work. His subtle yet constant efforts to make others feel indebted to him is his primary currency. He doesn't offer help. He offers an obligation. The birthday gift is not a token of affection. It is a down payment on future reciprocity. His acts of service are not altruistic. They are invisible chains designed to restrict your ability to ever genuinely disagree with him without feeling overwhelming guilt. This is why his eventual emotional explosion is so jarring. It is the moment he demands repayment of all the unrequested, silently tabulated favors he performed while suppressing his true desires. He throws the ledger onto the table and screams about how much he has sacrificed for you. effectively weaponizing the very benevolence he used to ensnare you. The nice guy is not giving. He is investing in control, and the interest rate is always paid in the coin of your psychological freedom. He demands that you manage his feelings, that you anticipate his unstated needs, and that you treat his pathology of avoidance as if it were a noble burden. This passive demand for emotional management is perhaps the most insidious form of manipulation he deploys, transforming his partner, friend, or coworker into his unpaid psychological caretaker. He is not a good person who suffers. He is a coward who externalizes the cost of his own unlived life. The final verdict on the nice guy is simple, though terrifying in its implications. He is the living proof that the avoidance of conflict is the most destructive form of warfare, and that the greatest disservice a man can do to the world is to be too afraid to be honest, especially with himself. The societal lie we must dismantle immediately is the widespread, toxic conflation of agreeability with morality. We have been culturally conditioned to believe that the highest virtue is the absence of friction, that emotional equilibrium is the metric of a good life, and that anyone who consistently maintains a pleasant, non-challenging facade must, by definition, be a decent human being. This is the precise oxygen that fuels the nice guy's pathology. He understands that the modern world, obsessed with safetyism and the avoidance of all discomfort, will reward his performance of harmlessness. We mistake his psychological paralysis for peaceful demeanor, his profound fear of rejection for gentle humility, and his unwillingness to state a need directly for selfless consideration. We are so terrified of genuine, difficult conflict, the kind that produces truth and necessary change, that we elevate the conflict avoider to sainthood, confusing his cowardice with civilization. The nice guy is merely the symptom of a culture that has pathologized honesty. He is the man who has perfectly internalized the message that his authentic, flawed self is too dangerous to reveal, and that the only acceptable mode of existence is a suffocating, self-erasing performance designed solely to prevent others from having an unpleasant feeling about him. But that performance is a house built on sand, and the deeper we look into the architecture of his emotional life, the more precarious the structure appears. This requires a willingness to look past the superficial narratives of self-help and popular psychology that constantly assure us that every conflict is merely a misunderstanding waiting to be hugged out. The nice guy's predicament is not a misunderstanding. It is a structural failure of character. And understanding that structural failure means resisting the easy, comforting explanation. If you find value in this kind of deep, challenging analysis, the kind of psychological archaeology that insists on uncovering the uncomfortable truth buried beneath cultural lies, then I urge you now to hit that subscribe button. This channel exists to resist the shallow reassurance market, and your support is what allows us to keep digging beneath the surface of the accepted reality. The core existential tragedy of the nice guy is that he has forfeited his own interior life in exchange for external validation. Yet he secretly despises the very people whose approval he craves, because he knows he earned that approval under false pretenses. He operates under the delusion that if he is just nice enough, the universe will somehow grant him the specific, powerful connections and rewards he is too afraid to pursue directly. When those rewards inevitably fail to materialize, because the universe does not reward passive investment, it rewards active courage. He does not blame his strategy. He blames the world for being fundamentally unjust. He becomes a performative martyr, draping himself in the cloak of his own exaggerated suffering. Listen closely to the language of the nice guy when he feels slighted. He doesn't discuss what he wants, he discusses what he has sacrificed. His narrative shifts from, "I deserve X," to, "Look at how unfairly I am treated after doing Y for everyone else." He reframes his lack of success or fulfillment not as a consequence of his own lack of assertive action, but as a moral failing on the part of the world. A world that failed to notice his quiet, heroic suffering and reward his silent virtue. This is the final layer of his manipulation. He seeks to induce guilt in others not by asking for something, but by silently demanding reparation for the burden of his own existence, which he insists was taken on solely for the benefit of those around him. The nice guy is not burdened by others. He is burdened by the enormous, suffocating weight of the self he refuses to let out. He is the ultimate tragic cautionary tale of what happens when a man tries to outsource his own psychological integration, turning his life into an endless, agonizing waiting game for a recognition that will never arrive. The moment he realizes that his benevolence was merely a strategy for control, and a failed one at that, is the moment his entire fabricated persona collapses into rage, leaving behind only the terrified, powerless child who never learned that true love is contingent not on performance but on truth. The deepest root of this psychological malaise is the primal fear of exile, a neurological mechanism that interprets disagreement as potential annihilation. The nice guy operating on a tribal brain that hasn't updated its software conflates setting a boundary, saying no to a neighbor, disagreeing with a partner, with social death. To avoid this perceived exile, he preemptively sacrifices the most dangerous parts of himself: his sharp edges, his genuine desires, and his capacity for righteous anger. He does not integrate his shadow. He banishes it to the basement of his psyche, hoping that by denying its existence he will appear flawlessly benign. But what you repress does not disappear. It merely gains control from the unconscious. His suffering is the result of having an internal civil war where his true self is the prisoner of his own manufactured persona. He suffers because he has outsourced the job of self-regulation to the whims of external validation, making his entire emotional landscape dependent on the unreliability of other people's moods. He lives life as a leaf perpetually blown by the breeze of consensus, and that forced passivity generates a tremendous, suffocating spiritual fatigue. This fatigue is the consequence of continuous self-betrayal. Every time he forces a smile when he feels contempt, every time he offers help he resents giving, he is committing a microaggression against his own integrity. He is injecting a small dose of resentment poison into his system, and it accumulates like a psychological plaque until the heart of the individual is calcified with bitterness. The paradox of his existence is that he attempts to gain freedom, the freedom from conflict, by enacting total servitude, not to others, but to the idea of what others demand. He is not actually serving the people he helps. He is serving the fragile fantasy of himself as a universally beloved savior. The moment the mask slips, the moment he confronts the reality that his performance failed to secure the specific, high-value reward he was aiming for, the accumulated poison erupts. That rage is not directed at the world for failing him. It is directed at the world for exposing him, for forcing him to see the staggering cost of his lifetime of self-denial. If this dissection of the shadow mechanics of modern life resonates with you, if you crave the uncomfortable truths that pierce through surface-level platitudes, then take a moment to subscribe. We are building a community dedicated to confronting these illusions, and you don't want to miss the next deep dive into the parts of the psyche we are taught to ignore. The price of performing niceness is the death of authenticity. And authenticity is the only currency accepted for genuine human connection. Because the nice guy's approval is always directed at his mask, the approval never actually lands where it is needed, on the true, fearful, messy man underneath. This is why he can be surrounded by friends and admirers and still feel profoundly existentially alone. He has successfully tricked the world, but in doing so, he has tricked himself out of the possibility of true intimacy. How can he be truly seen when he has buried the one thing that needed seeing? His suffering is loneliness, but it is a loneliness he meticulously constructed himself, brick by brick, out of fear and courtesy. He is a prisoner in a magnificent, self-built cage of good intentions. He must realize that the very qualities he fears, aggression, assertiveness, the willingness to disappoint others, are not moral defects but necessary psychological tools. These tools are the foundation of genuine kindness. True kindness is not the absence of aggression, but the conscious choice not to deploy it, even when the power to do so is readily available. It is the kindness of a strong man, not the feigned compliance of a weak one. When the nice guy finally integrates this truth, that he must first accept his own capacity for darkness and disruption before he can claim any moral high ground, that is the moment his suffering begins to ease. He stops being the passive recipient of life's injustices and becomes an active agent, capable of defining his own worth internally, independent of external applause. It is a terrifying transition, a voluntary descent into the messy truth of the self. If you find value in these relentless examinations of human nature, consider supporting this channel by subscribing. It allows us to commit the time and resources necessary to produce this kind of challenging, high-value, deep-focus content. The tragedy of the nice guy is the tragedy of wasted potential, a life spent building a beautiful facade around an empty room. The final verdict on niceness is that it is often just cowardice masquerading as virtue. It is the strategy of the emotionally immature, who believe that life is a transactional moral ledger, where good deeds are automatically redeemed for desired outcomes. The ultimate act of self-rescue is to stop trying to be nice and start focusing on being good, which requires courage, truth, and the willingness to risk being disliked. You must be willing to burn down the false self built on consensus to allow the genuine, assertive self to emerge from the ashes. This is the only path to authentic power and peace, and it begins the moment you accept that the approval you seek from others is utterly worthless compared to the respect you earn from the man in the mirror. Stop asking for permission to live your own life. If you are ready to join the small but growing community dedicated to challenging these entrenched psychological lies, subscribe now and commit to the hard work of building a life based on truth, not performance. The final verdict on the nice guy is that his strategy is an emotional and moral insolvency. He attempts to purchase acceptance with compliance, only to find that he has no real self left to invest. Authentic power is not granted. It is claimed through the ruthless excision of unnecessary needs, chief among them, the need to be universally liked. You must embrace the terrifying clarity that your discomfort is irrelevant to the machinery of the world. The universe does not reward martyrs, it rewards competence. It does not reward suffering, it rewards agency. True freedom is the moment you stop needing applause and start accepting the necessary friction of genuine existence. Niceness is the poison that promises sanctuary but delivers stagnation, convincing you that it is safer to be a prisoner of consensus than a sovereign in your own territory. Stop seeking comfort and start seeking challenge. Stop seeking agreement and start seeking truth. The only man worth respecting is the one who has faced his own shadow and decided consciously what he is willing to risk losing in order to secure what he truly needs. He is the man who has learned the most difficult lesson of all, that if you never risk being hated, you will never know what it feels like to be truly respected. And perhaps more importantly, you will never truly respect yourself. Do not let fear write your biography. You must choose to be the force that shapes your environment, not the victim who merely reacts to it. If you believe, as I do, that psychological evolution is the hardest and most essential fight we face, and if you are committed to the brutal work of stripping away the lies we tell ourselves to feel safe, subscribe now. Join the few who choose the difficult path of truth over the comfortable illusion of performance. The ultimate verdict is that true personal sovereignty is always earned in isolation. The nice guy never truly lived because he never allowed the needy performing version of himself to fully perish. He clung to the transactional ghost of validation, hoping that if he minimized his existence enough, others would finally grant him the meaning he refused to claim for himself. The deepest, most unforgivable error is the failure to recognize that your self-worth is not a collective consensus. It is a declaration you make loudly or silently and only to yourself. You are not defined by who you manage to please, but by the immovable lines you draw in the sand, the conscious, deliberate exclusions you make regarding what you will no longer tolerate in your life, your work, or your character. Stop waiting for the world to bestow legitimacy upon you. The external world will always demand a higher price than you can afford, demanding compliance in exchange for temporary peace. The only authority that matters is the one you grant yourself, and that authority is built exclusively upon competence and the willingness to accept the necessary, productive loneliness of a high standard. Your highest self is not the person who is universally embraced. He is the man who is respected by his own reflection, regardless of the noise outside the glass. We are building a resistance against the cultural imperative to shrink ourselves into likability. a community dedicated to the psychological rigor required to build a life of substance, not merely successful appeasement. If this strikes you not as philosophy, but as a necessary confrontation, then join us. Subscribe and commit to the few who choose to live powerfully, rather than simply living safely. The final, crushing truth is this: the cost of being universally liked is the absolute surrender of your soul. You cannot be both a powerful sovereign and a professional appeaser. The nice guy traded the agonizing weight of responsibility for the soft prison of consensus, believing that if he shrank small enough, the world would finally hold him. It never will. The universe demands gravity. It respects the thing that stands still and defines its own orbit. The ultimate verdict is that the only true ethical requirement you have is to develop your highest potential, and anyone who demands you shrink that potential for their comfort is irrelevant noise. Stop trying to earn your space. Take it. The true verdict is that the only way to escape the prison of likability is through self-imposed severity. Your highest obligation is not to collective compassion, but to competence and the ruthless exclusion of the trivial. Stop apologizing for the size of your ambition. This is not just a philosophy to be consumed. It is a life to be lived, intentionally outside the perimeter of easy acceptance. If you are finally prepared to trade temporary comfort for necessary consequence, then join the community dedicated to this radical autonomy. Subscribe now and let us build the resistance together.